Welcome to Imperfect Thriving, episode 31, How to Have a Healthy Relationship with Food with Nicole Mareno.
Is that you're not participating in your life whatsoever. I mean, it's completely isolating and you can become completely disconnected. So you can be physically present, but you're not present at all.
This is the Imperfect Thriving podcast with Kathryn Ely. Imperfect Thriving is a way of life, really. This podcast is a place for you to learn mindful and intentional ways to move ever closer to the life you want. Imperfectly, of course. Have you hit that subscribe button yet? It is a way for you to always be updated with the latest episodes of Imperfect Thriving. And ratings and reviews are really important to me. And it's an easy way for you to give back if you have enjoyed the podcast. I am always grateful to receive your feedback. Today, I wanted to share a review from Dot, who says, as someone who has had a cancer scare myself, this podcast resonated so much with me. Life is too short to live it for others. Find out what is meaningful for yourself. Take care of yourself. Only devote time to relationships that are meaningful, and you will find you are also helping others more than before. Thanks, Lanier, for opening up your soul to friends and strangers who can gain so much from your lessons. And thanks to Kathryn for making it possible. Well, thank you, Dot, for taking your time to let me know what you think of the show. And I could not agree more about Lanier. She was an incredible guest with an incredible story. So if you haven't listened to episode 19, Lanier Scott Isom, Courageously Finding Her Own Path, I highly recommend it. Thanks again, Dot. You have probably heard me say this before, but we all have a relationship with two things, food and money. If those relationships are not healthy, then they have negative effects on us and our relationships with others. We all probably know someone who has struggled in their relationship with food. Maybe you have yourself. It is so easy to do. With all of the images of perfect-looking women and men all over TV and social media, it is difficult to have a good, healthy relationship with food and our own bodies. That is why I really wanted to have Nicole Mareno on the show. She is our guest today. Nicole is a PhD, registered nurse, and certified intuitive eating counselor in Atlanta, Georgia. Having had disordered eating in her past, Nicole is passionate about helping her clients rediscover intuitive eating and heal their relationship with food and their own body image. 3 key things we will learn in this episode are the ways an unhealthy relationship with food affects our overall physical and mental well-being, how to have a healthy relationship with food and help your children to do the same, and the best way to help a friend who might be struggling with disordered eating. But first, I have to tell you something that I have in the works that's coming very soon. It is a 5-day Progress Over Perfection workshop. I'm going to be giving you bite-sized podcasts 5 days in a row, along with pre-podcast assessment and post-podcast assessments to help guide you through. So stay tuned for that. It is coming soon. Now, let's welcome Nicole Mareno to the show.
Say yeah! Say yeah!
Today we have Nicole Mareno. Nicole, I am so excited to have you on the Imperfect Thriving podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Well, first, I would just like to know a little bit more about your story and how you got to where you are today.
Oh my goodness, it is a long story, so we will do the Reader's Digest version of the story. which I love that the audience of this show will get that joke, because I think younger folks do not quite know what
No.
Reader's Digest is. So. But yeah, so my background, I'm a registered nurse. And as part of my professional career, I did a lot of work in community and preventative health. And I've been working for more than 18 years in the profession in a variety of settings. And I really enjoyed doing the preventative health aspects, like, helping families to be more physically active and eat healthier. So that was a big part of my practice. I went back to school to get my PhD and focused on wellness. Eventually, I got a job teaching at a couple of universities. That was sort of my first stop after the PhD, and started doing research in weight management. So it kind of shifted prevention to intervention, and doing a lot of behavioral, weight management programs, and participating, kind of watching how people went through the programs, what happened with their weight, what happened with their mood. And I was in academics for about 8 years. And at the same time, I also, unfortunately, had developed an eating disorder of my own. So I'll take us off to that little track for a second. I was 31 when I developed my eating disorder. And I think most of the time, many people think that eating disorders are, for teenagers, or it's just young women that have eating disorders, but that's simply, not the case. And we will talk about that a little bit more, I know, later. But anytime there's big changes in life, and especially if you have the genetic susceptibility, the personality, it's sort of like a perfect storm of factors that come together. And a feeling of being out of control. One thing we like to control is our food intake and the amount of exercise that we do. And of course, you combine that with doing weight loss research, and I developed many of my own issues. I had recovered from anorexia, so it was a lot of restriction, a lot of compulsive exercise. So I was really struggling with my body image and my relationship with food. And the last study I did as an academic, I sat down with, was 13 men and women who were, and I'll do this in quotes, successful at weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to their full life histories around weight. It was called a focused life history, just around their weight stories. And it was an amazing study, but I was just so upset when I listened to their stories, because I heard all about their negative body image and the number of diets they had been on unsuccessfully, how preoccupied they were with calories and tracking, and how disappointing it was to get on the scale and it wasn't budging. And then there were some more extreme behaviors that they were talking about, and just the impact that it had on their day-to-day life, their mood. There was panic if they had to go out to eat or to a wedding. What am I going to do? What am I going to eat? And I sat there one day in my office and I thought, I'm a thin person who is recovering from an eating disorder. They are doing the same behaviors that I am doing, and we are giving them the green light to do that. And it is impacting my health overall, and it is impacting their health overall. And so I made a decision at that point that I could no longer participate in doing weight loss research, and shifted my expertise into disordered eating and eating disorder recovery.
Wow, what a story. I'm trying to keep up with all the different parts that I want to know more about as you're telling me that amazing story. And I'm sure that I will forget some of them. But it really sounds to me like as someone who has not experienced at least severe disordered eating, I'm sure that I've had some form of disordered eating because I'm not perfect, but as someone who hasn't experienced this specific thing, it sounds to me like it was absolutely, totally, and completely ruling the lives of the people in that study. It's not just about your relationship with food. It takes over your mind, and when you're in your head living with these worries and these stresses in your mind, you are not out in the world enjoying your life.
I 100% agree. Eating disorders can hijack your brain for sure. And the other downside is that you're not participating in your life whatsoever. I mean, it's completely isolating, and you can become completely disconnected. So you can be physically present, but you're not present at all.
And if you don't mind me asking, as one person who studies behavior to another person who studies behavior, what do you think it was that led to your disordered eating?
That's such a great question. I definitely have the personality attributes of the perfectionist. I have some.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, what are the personality traits that sort of make it easier to have an eating disorder?
I definitely think that many people with eating disorders, they want to be accepted, want to do everything right all the time. If they're not doing things right or perfectly, then there's this tendency just to freeze or abandon or not progress forward. And I think it's easy for people who have a perfectionist way of being to create a lot of rigid rules for themselves.
Amen to that.
Keeps us safe.
Mm-hmm.
Keeps us safe within the, perfectionism. It's like, okay, well, I'm never going to attain perfection, but I'm just going to keep rewriting these rules in order to try and keep myself, safe and in the right direction. But I think like those personality traits can really, really come out, like being eager to please, things of that nature.
Okay, so that's definitely one thing that led to yours that also leads to other people having disordered eating. What else?
Strong genetic association for sure. And some coexisting anxiety too. I do think all of the clients that I see do have issues with anxiety and depression.
And I would argue that it is the need for perfection that leads to those as well. I think at the top, it sounds like you've got this personality trait that sort of trickles down. So tell me, I did not know that there was a genetic association. Can you tell me more about that? That is so troubling yet interesting.
It is. If you have, it's specifically a parent, but most likely a mother or an aunt that has an eating disorder. I mean, it's like 9, I think, I'm not going to get this number correct. It's something like you're 9 times more likely to develop an eating disorder yourself. So there's a strong genetic component to it that if you've had women, especially, and I know we're focused on women specifically here, if you have women in your family who have had struggles with disordered eating or an eating disorder, well, I think one, there is the actual genetic piece. And there's also, if they are struggling, you're probably hearing about their body hatred. You're watching them restrict their food intake. You're watching them weigh themselves and beat themselves up every day. I think it's really both of those things.
Yeah, you answered my next question before I could even ask it. How much of that is nature and how much of that is nurture? So it's hard to separate those two. Okay, so there's the personality component, there's the genetic association, and a coexisting anxiety or depression. Is there anything else that you see that kind of goes into that mix?
Yes, dieting. And that, I hear the same story a lot in my office from my clients. There is this belief system that gets developed early in their life that they must be thin, they must be pretty, they must control their weight, or else their life is going to be very difficult.
So there's an ideal picture that someone creates in their mind, and it really, really makes a terrible, what is the word I'm looking for? Concoction, when you put that ideal picture with the personality of wanting to please, wanting to be perfect, and wanting to be the best you can, is what it sounds like to me.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
And that's sort of the perfect storm situation. And I'm never going to remember who said this exactly, but not everybody who diets develops an eating disorder, but everybody who has an eating disorder has dieted.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's anything that I've learned in my counseling and consulting practice, it's that each one of us has a relationship with two things: money and food. How do we develop a healthy relationship with food, and what does that look like?
Such a great question. I would say that the healthy relationship with food, that I would define that as being, and we'll talk about a little bit about the work that I do with intuitive eating, but that really comes from the inner wisdom of the body to guide us, to tell us what to eat, how much to eat, when to eat. Babies are naturally intuitive about their eating, and they are going to tell their parents right away if they're full, if they don't like something.
Yes, they will.
Might spit it out right on you. So,
Yes. Or refuse to eat anything that's not an orange vegetable.
Exactly. Yes. And that changes. And I imagine that's incredibly difficult.
You start to realize that when their skin starts turning orange. But anyway,
that's funny.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so, I think that developing a healthy relationship with food, it's a little complicated because we did have an intuitive relationship early on, and I no way want to throw parents under the bus here. There's very well-meaning parents who provide a lot of rules to their children around eating. Don't eat this. This is good. This is bad. Clean your plate. Those sorts of things that begin in our early lives to disconnect us from our inner cues of hunger and fullness and satisfaction.
Yes. So things like clean your plate.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that I am guilty of sort of taking my children a little bit away from their intuitive way of thinking as children. What can we do as parents to nurture that healthy relationship with food? Any do's and don'ts that you could share about that?
Absolutely. Do give yourself compassion. You do not have to be perfect at it. Offer a variety of foods in your home, a variety of foods at meals. I like the work of Ellen Satter. She's a registered dietitian, and she developed something called the eating competence model and the division of responsibility. So it's the parent's job to provide the food, and it's the child's job to decide what and how much they want to eat.
Oh, that's perfect. It's so simple, but so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. I love that now we have a very easy way to nurture that good relationship.
Absolutely.
So, how does dieting interfere with a naturally healthy relationship with food?
Well, it is a totally external thing. So if intuitive eating is the internal, your body guide to tell you how, what, how much and when to eat, diets are the opposite of that. They're going to dictate from an external source, authority source, that you should only, and there's a lot of shoulds in here, you should only eat this much, you should only eat these foods, you should only eat at these times. And again, that keeps us completely disconnected from what our body needs, what we want.
So, I guess I should have asked you first if you can explain exactly what intuitive eating is.
Yes. So intuitive eating is eating in a way that we allow our bodies to guide us in terms of, eating when we're hungry and stopping when we feel full and letting our body be the guide. We are the expert of our body. We are the expert of our taste preferences. We have a budget for food that we need to stay within. We have, I call it somebody's eating world. There's a lot of things within your eating world.
Sure.
Yeah. And so it's really just coming back into touch with, what feels good in your body rather than having somebody else tell you, well, you need to eat these super foods or you need to go on the keto or intermittent fasting. And those are very disconnecting for us.
So, this might be a bit of a silly question, but like, what if my body keeps telling me all it wants is potato chips?
That's
Like,
such a great question.
what do I do then? What do I do with that? Because on one hand, I mean, I want to be healthy, right? I mean, I don't
Sure.
want to just eat potato chips. So how do I marry those two things together if all I'm craving is potato chips?
Well, I think that's interesting to tap in and get curious about sort of what might be going on that is sort of driving that desire to have potato chips. And if that's really a desire that you're like, I just really want to have these, they're comforting, they're crunchy, they taste really good. I assure you, if you gave yourself permission even to eat the nothing but potato chips, you would get sick of them pretty quickly and you would naturally want to start eating something else.
Okay. So I get that. When it comes to intuitive eating, like in that particular example, wanting potato chips, could it be that my body needs salt? There goes my microphone. That my body needs salt or needs something.
It very well could be. I like to think, is it coming from above the neck? Is it like a persistent thought that I have to have potato chips that might be disconnected from the rest of your body? Or is it sort of from below the neck? Are you getting cues that you are hungry and maybe something very salty sounds good right now and would be very satisfying?
So how do we figure out which one it is?
That's such a great question. Yeah. When I think it is tapping into, is it a repetitive thought in my mind? Like, I want potato chips. I shouldn't eat potato chips. Oh, but I really want potato chips, but I really shouldn't eat them. Or are you feeling things like, a little bit of emptiness in your stomach? Are you feeling maybe like, that might sound good, but apple sounds good too, and so does a sandwich. So maybe you're just hungry and it's not just the potato chips that you want.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we really have to try to get out of our heads and any kind of limiting thoughts that we're having and let our body tell us out of our heads into our bodies.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
And that takes a lot of practice. It doesn't just happen one day that you wake up and you're an intuitive eater, because there is a lot of, dieting mentality and thoughts and belief systems that are there, and really becoming aware of those. Are those, dictating your eating, or is it the internal that's dictating your eating?
Yes. So like with any mindfulness and any time we're trying to develop a deeper awareness, we're going to have to peel the onion and get past all of the shoulds and all of the things that we've internalized from our culture and society before we really can listen to our bodies.
Exactly.
Okay. So we alluded to the fact earlier that it is easy to think that disordered eating is something that happens to young women and adolescents in their teens and early 20s. But tell me about your experience with women in midlife and disordered eating.
Yes, we do think that it is mostly just younger women. And I see all genders, all adult ages in my practice, but I do have a good number of men and women that are in the middle age group. And I think it is really important to know that we're becoming more aware of the fact that there is disordered eating and there are eating disorders among middle-aged women. In fact, the rate's around 3% of women over 40 have an eating disorder. That may not seem like a lot, but if you think about the population of women, even just in the US alone, those numbers can be staggering. And that's not counting the people that have, a sub-threshold eating disorder or disordered eating that never gets detected.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it is very important to know that eating disorders can develop in midlife if somebody's not had one before. Somebody can have a relapse in midlife, and we can talk in a minute about what makes us vulnerable at this stage in our lives. And we can also have somebody who maybe has that sub-threshold disordered eating or has had an eating disorder for a very long time that it becomes exacerbated in this stage. So it really is all three of those that women may, fall into. If there's been something underlying, especially body image issues for many, many years, menopause is a big period of vulnerability for women to develop eating disorders.
Ah, and is that because that our bodies change so much and the way our weight, the way food affects our body is different at
Yes.
menopause?
Yes. Well, eating disorders, there are three distinct time periods where eating disorders are most prevalent for women: puberty, around the childbearing or childbirth, and then menopause. And all of those times, we are having changes in our hormones. And so, yes, having your estrogen level decline. Well, one, when our ovaries aren't producing estrogen anymore, we do put on adipose or fat tissue around the middle in order for that tissue as an active endocrine tissue that develops estrogen to help protect our body from bone loss and from, heart disease and things of that nature. And estrogen is really important. So we need to have it, and our body will naturally help us produce it when we're no longer producing it in our ovaries. But unfortunately, we have put a problem stamp on the, weight gain around the middle is something that needs to be managed or taken care of. And so, yes, that definitely makes women who are in perimenopause and then postmenopausal also, but not as much, really perimenopausal times, more vulnerable.
Yeah, so there's a physical change in our bodies going on in those three different time periods that have to do with our different levels of hormones. But I would also imagine we each have a picture in our own minds of how we look and that we should stay that way, and that it's probably difficult to separate from that picture during those times as well. Would you agree with
Oh,
that?
100%. Yes. And I mean, there is this narrative around, wanting to keep young and anti-aging and having to do a lot of extreme things to, keep ourselves young looking rather than, really focusing on grieving the fact that body changes are inevitable. Like nobody looks the same at 80 as they do when they're 15. So, part of that's just coming to terms with, yeah, my body is going to change and so is everybody's, and it's hard and that's okay.
Yeah, so that's another area where if we are rigid with our rules, it is going to cause us problems. So that's why I'm always working with my clients about moving from rigid rules and shoulds to psychological flexibility. So
Yes.
that is another area where we need to work on that for sure. So let me see. I had so many follow-ups that I wanted. Oh, so yeah, what are some other things that may cause disordered eating to pop up or at least come to the surface in midlife?
Well, I do think that, there's so much going on at midlife. And one thing I just love about your podcast is talking about all the different domains of your life.
Oh,
And
thank you.
you're welcome. And I really do think that our relationship with food affects every single domain that you talk about here. Um, it is the body changes and the changing body image. And I also think that there's a lot of stressors in midlife. I mean, if you're part of the sandwich generation
Yes.
and you're taking care of children and you're having aging, parents to care for, you're losing your parents. Kids are going off to college. Maybe your relationship with your spouse and partner has changed. I think a lot of stressors can, and big life changes also put women at risk in mid-age for developing disordered eating and or eating disorders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So what if I or one of our listeners thought, I'm not loving my relationship with food right now. I don't like the path that I'm going down. I may either be at a disordered eating or I might feel like that's the trajectory that I'm heading on. What should we do for ourselves?
I really think it's important to reach out for some help and at least get an assessment from somebody who specializes in disordered eating. The National Eating Disorders Association has a great self-test, and there's also resources on there to find somebody in your area who might be able to just do a consultation with you. As my big platform is that I believe that everybody, no matter what age they are, can heal their relationship with food and deserves to have treatment for it if they want to do that. Because there can be a lot of shame involved with,
Mm-hmm.
developing disordered eating in midlife. Oh, that's something that happens to young people. Oh, my doctor won't believe me because I'm not thin enough to look like I have an eating disorder. But is really important to seek out the help of a professional.
And so let's look at it from another perspective. What should we do for a friend if we are concerned and we think one of our friends might be struggling with their relationship with food? What's the best way? What's the best thing we can do to help that friend?
I think being an active listener and just asking very broad but gentle questions. I mean, yes, tell me about how things been going with food, or I've noticed that um, you're not eating as much as you used to when we would go out to lunch together, I guess, in other non-pandemic times.
Yeah.
Um, or yeah, I noticed that, you've been saying a lot of very negative things about your body. Is that something you'd like to talk about? Really just being a listener and, just sharing if you're very concerned, can I support you in, finding somebody close to our area that might be able to help? Are you open to that? And I just think being a good friend and a support and a good listener.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So let me backtrack just a little bit and ask, how does an unhealthy relationship with food or disordered eating impact our health and well-being overall as women in midlife?
Oh my goodness. Every single dimension of our health, and there are multiple dimensions, physical health wise, there are many risks to eating disorders. I think particularly for women in midlife, I'd be very concerned about bone mass. That would be one of my very big concerns. A lot of gastrointestinal issues, anxiety and depression, changes in sexual desire and sexual functioning. So those would be kind of on the physical, and mental health wise. But I also think just from like a social health perspective, there can be a lot of isolation, a lot of pulling away, withdrawing. And, loneliness is a big health risk. Sometimes we don't think about that. Stress, chronic stress. And, just from like a spiritual, I'm thinking of all of the different, domains that you talk about, that spirituality and faith, that sometimes there can be this just sort of emptiness within when you're dealing with these issues. And so maybe, not really attending to that necessarily at first, but, and certainly, that's just for disordered eating. If we're talking about, a full-blown eating disorder, I mean, purging and, heavy restricting both can cause cardiac arrest. It's very serious. And the other thing that takes people's lives with eating disorders is death by suicide. So that's certainly, there are some very severe risks. These are deadly, complicated illnesses, but they are treatable.
Yeah, so I really am hearing that it affects your everything to do with your mental and physical health.
Mm-hmm.
So I just hope if there's anybody out there listening to us today who feels like your eating is out of control or that you're struggling in that area, please know that you are worth getting help for yourself, that your family and your friends value you, and that we want you to find the help that you really need. So I think when we were talking earlier that you had a tool or something to share with our audience. Can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. Sure. Yes. Well, I do work with all sorts of eating disorders, but I have a special place in my heart for binge eating disorder, helping people who are struggling with emotional eating. And yes, if you go onto my website, I do have, and sign up for my newsletter, you can I have a free guide that's called Help, I Can't Stop Binging. And I'm happy to provide that for free. And it gives you, a couple reasons why we might binge eat, with a couple of first steps you can take to start to heal.
And we will put this in the show notes, but will you share your website with us now?
Of course. It's www.nurtureconsultingllc.com.
And so you are based in Atlanta, correct? Or the Atlanta area?
Correct. Yes.
Do you work with clients in all parts of the country so that if somebody in Birmingham wanted to work with you, would that be possible without them having to drive to Atlanta?
Yes, I have a multi-state nursing license, which means that I can practice in more than 30 states. So I can do virtual sessions with clients outside of Georgia.
Okay, so if y'all are feeling like you need help in this area, Nicole would definitely be someone you could reach out to for help. And so I could I have a million more questions, and I certainly hope that we can talk again sometime. But I like to wrap up every podcast with asking each of my guests, what is one imperfect action that you think we could all take today to move closer to our best lives?
Oh my goodness. I would say think about what you really love to eat and eat it sometime soon, whether it's the potato chips or ice cream or something that brings you joy and pleasure, to start to reconnect yourself back to the fact that, food is for fuel, but it's also for pleasure too. And so I would encourage you to do that with, some attunement and lots of enjoyment.
Oh, well, I absolutely love that. And I have loved having you on the show today. Thank you so much, Nicole, for being here.
Thank you so much, Kathryn, for having me. It was so much fun.
Oh, great. And so I just want to remind all of you what Nicole is urging us to do. And I love it because I think letting ourselves let go of all the shoulds and the expectations that we heap on ourselves, that food is something that we should be able to enjoy. And maybe we don't enjoy ice cream every day, but this is where, once again, we want to lean into psychological flexibility and away from this rigid thinking of, I can never have ice cream, I can never have potato chips. And let yourself just enjoy. So I love that. And I'm going to be thinking a lot today about the one thing I want to enjoy tonight. I haven't decided what it is, but it'll be something really good. So until we meet again here next week, go out and take imperfect action toward your best life. Imperfect Thriving is a part of the Practice of the Practice podcast network, a network of podcasts seeking to help you thrive imperfectly. To hear other podcasts like the Bomb Mom podcast, Beta Male Revolution, or Empowered and Unapologetic, go to practiceofthepractice.com/network. If you love this podcast, will you rate and review it on iTunes or your favorite podcast player? Also, I have a free 9-part Blueprint to Thrive email course. It's a step-by-step guide to find out what you want your life to look like, exactly what's holding you back, and how to get to that life you want. Head on over to www.imperfectthriving.com/course to get the course today. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information with regard to the subject matter covered. This is given with the understanding that neither the host, Practice of the Practice, or guests are providing legal, mental health, or other professional information. If you need a professional, I encourage you to reach out to one.